Okay, I think we have something like 45 minutes, perhaps we can start. I don't know if we will be getting more people into. Anyhow, let's start, and I could suggest perhaps that well, these 45 minutes intend to be quite participatory, and therefore, well, an open discussion from your side, from the participants, and in our case, Sayoa will be taking notes. We'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation as an introduction to the group, and I will be trying to facilitate or moderate the discussions. But well, all depends on your inputs and your active engagement in the session development. Sayoa, if you want, well, Sayoa and I are coming from Tecnalia, and Tecnalia is leading Work Package 1 on standardization. And well, we will be, as I was saying, in charge of facilitating this session. Sayoa, you want to go through the slides?
Yes, I don't think we need this slide because Sophie has already presented. It was just in case to give some background. Yeah, and apart from the mission background, we also wanted to give a general overview of what we consider at the moment a climate service. And we are working on this definition, as you can see on screen. And then a friend will present also example of a climate service. So,
well, we've been talking about this during all day, but highlighting that idea of providing climate information oriented towards assisting decision making to individuals and organizations, and that service component or service approach implies responding to a specific user needs, and this is the overall framework of Climate Europe 2, and well, the framework of this discussion too, taking into account that in this case we are trying to analyze and discuss about how climate services could be serving the implementation of the mission adaptation of the European Union. This is, well, Paco was presenting as an example of climate service, the European Climate Risk Assessment. Here, we opted for including a very targeted and specific application with a web interface in which local authorities could be analyzing heat waves and heat extremes in specific urban areas in order to understand what is going to be the evolution, or trying to anticipate what is going to be the evolution for different time horizons and different climate severities or scenarios. What is going to be that evolution of heat waves and thermal stress and thermal extremes in order to inform and deploy targeted policies for responding to this challenge. And well, this is an example, a web application which includes climate information and climate projections in a certain context with this, which is spatially explicit and geographically located for policy making or decision making in urban areas, health authorities, etc. And this is, well, a more specific example of what climate services could look like. Okay, these are, and in order to already start the discussions, and I would suggest that the participant in the group, we are only 12 people, taking into account that Sayoa and I are facilitating, well, 10 people participating, which is handable for these 40 minutes. And what I would suggest is that we go over those 3 questions. We shouldn't forget that the discussion is framed in the implementation of mission adaptation, and therefore the first question is related to that, the importance of climate services for the implementation of the mission, and well, what could you be requiring, asking to those climate services and the community providing climate services in order to make that mission implementation possible. There are 2 other questions related to good and bad experiences about climate services and how can standards or guidelines enable the uptake of climate services, but those could follow this first question. And please open your cameras and turn on the mics to start intervening.
Don't be shy. I mean, the idea is a warm discussion, and we have the advantage that we are just around 10 people, as Efrain mentioned, and we would like to hear from your experience, your view. At this stage, everyone has a very detailed experience, and it's good these sharing opportunities. Yes, Sophie?
Just maybe because we are not many people, maybe it would be good to do a quick tour of the table and people say to us who they are, what they are doing, and then maybe that will foster some discussion. I don't know, maybe.
Good suggestion. Let's opt for that.
If you want to, I can start it. So as I said before, my name is Sophie Berger, and I'm working for the European Commission on the mission on adaptation to climate change.
I will be naming Alessandro.
Yeah, I can go next. Alessandro Spinuso, the KNMI, so the Royal Institute of Meteorology in the Netherlands. I am one of the partners of Climate Europe 2, particularly addressing the problem of traceability and provenance of the data. And in general, I work for the data management and data technology department of my institute. And I would like to share a comment on these questions later.
Okay, much. Quentin Lejeune.
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks for organizing this webinar. So my name is Quentin Lejeune. I work at Climate Analytics as a senior scientist. I'm more identify as A, with a letter A is for academia, but in addition to publishing papers, doing research, we're actually working as a boundary organization, so also as climate services provider. Then I've coordinated some online tools to visualize impacts of climate change in the past, namely the Climate Impact Explorer that was done in collaboration for the network for greening the financial system. So that's a consortium of central banks. And also more recently within the EU H2020 project, Provide as developer and coordinator of the development of the Provide Climate Risk Dashboard, which is providing also information on future climate impacts, specifically for 100 cities in Europe. So I'm interested in hearing the responses to these questions from others mostly.
Thank you very much. Oyvind, I'm just reading in the order.
Hello.
Of
Yes.
appearance in my screen.
Nice meeting you all. My name is Oyvind Arnes. I work with DNV together with Asun. I'm based in Norway, working on Climate Europe 2 on the work package of standardization and assurance of climate services. My field of work, I work a lot with the offshore wind industry, in particular, who are looking for climate services and on predictions, climate predictions of wind. the reliability of wind and such, for instance, and other aspects in the ocean space field.
Thank you very much. Suraj?
Yep. Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm on my phone now. Yes, so Suraj Desai, I'm at the University of Leeds, where I'm professor of climate change adaptation, and I'm one of the partners in a small partner in Climate Europe too. And yes, I guess my interests are on the use of information in decision making. And I guess, but yeah, I mean, the context of these questions, I mean, I've got an extra interest because I'm a member of the European Advisory Board, European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Nakiet, sorry if my...
Yes, you pronounce it well. So
Okay.
my name is Nakiet Msemo. I am an assistant scientific officer at the World Meteorological Organization, and I mainly work and support in the development of the State of Climate Services report. So actually, I'm really interested in this topic, and I look forward to learning a lot from you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Katia?
Yes, hello. My name is Katia, and I come from Slovenian Environmental Agency, and I work in the department for preparation of climate data, and I'm also very interested in this topic. Thank you for organizing this webinar.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start. Some of you already mentioned that you'd like to comment or react on these framework questions. I think I would suggest that we align the questions and the interventions with the mission adaptation, because in the end, this session is related to mission adaptation implementation. There are specificities, or there are specific requirements, suggestions to climate services providers in the framework of the mission adaptation.
What I wanted to share is mostly, so I belong to the public sector, right? So this is KNMI is the National Meteorological Service, and our investments on research, technology, and provision of climate information really depends also on the changes into the political establishment. So sometimes we are allowed to deliver information for research purposes, so to support more research on climate change. Sometimes we are expected to deliver information which are addressing warnings and information also and details about expected extremes, for instance. But then how far we can go in designing and providing a climate service which might actually provide support for adaptation policies, for instance, it really depends from the mandate that we get from our government. And this unfortunately also changes with time. And sometimes the local governments, they change faster than the bigger programs. So this is it's a very challenging problem that we have, because our investment, they cannot always fulfill the general program in an efficient way.
Quite interesting. And what could you be? What could be your recommendation to have a long-term agreed climate service development roadmap? Yeah, that I guess will help, because then it will be clearly normalized also the way how these public services can interface with the financial sector, for instance, because some public services, they can even provide some kind of climate services which are comparable to those provided by financial parties.
depending by region and by country at the moment. So and these choices also change with the local political directions. So that's why a long-term planning could for maybe even a normalization within how these things should work in Europe, for instance, could help approaching this target more efficiently.
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome.
I don't know if, well, someone else wants to intervene, because if not, in relation to that suggestion, I think that some things could be said about the second and third question about concrete experiences, exemplifying what you're saying, and how can standards support that long-term perspective. But I don't know if someone else from the group would like to comment on this. Do you share this perception of public service dependence on the climate services development, and therefore, well, national Met Offices and, well, the political mandate dependence on the evolution of the climate services themselves? Katia, from Slovenia, because you were working also, if I understood it right, providing climate information in Slovenia. Do you agree about this?
Efren, I think it may not be related, but Sophie also raised her hand.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, because
Yeah.
I have a single screen and I don't.
Yeah, but
Sorry.
that wasn't directly related to what Alessandro was saying, but that's true that this is probably one of the issue, but also my feeling and from discussing with others is also that there is a little bit of a gap between the data producers and on the climate service side and the users, and it's very difficult as a user, especially if they're not specialized in climate. And we know that on the local level, for instance, with the mission, it's often one person who has to deal with adaptation and mitigation and other things at the same time. And so I think for them it's very challenging to know where the tools are, how to use them, what are the strengths and weaknesses, and really making it operational and actionable. And I guess also another aspect then might be how to deal with the uncertainties. Because this is something that is not easy to communicate, and this is from the data producer point of view, from the scientific point of view, it is crucial, but also it kind of blurry the message from the user point of view. So,
and in that respect, do you see a specific challenges about the climate services or specific recommendations in that mission implementation, being closer to the mission deployment and implementation? On top of that gap, what would you suggest or recommend?
I'm not sure I'm in a position to recommend anything right now, and if I did, it would be on my personal from what I think personally. But this is just I mean, from the mission and from discussing with regions and local authorities, a lot of them would like to act more on climate, but they just lost. They don't know where to start. It's a bit of a crowded field, and there are different information. It's not necessarily easy.
Yeah, and there is, well, depending on the geographical context, but there are different data sources, European, national, regional in some cases, and that can also confuse if there is not a clear message about the complementarity of those.
Yes.
Quentin, you raise your hand.
Yes, thanks. I had a follow-up question to Sophie, because she mentioned the difficulty to understand uncertainties and to deal with those. I was wondering, were you referring to the difficulty to understand how important or how big uncertainties are, the way they're communicated, or to interpret their size and their magnitude, let's say, or rather their nature, because there could be different types of uncertainties coming, from the type of scenarios that we're looking at, or the uncertainties coming from the modeling, and even then there are different types of uncertainties coming from modeling that we could differentiate from. So I was wondering whether you were rather referring to the uncertainties, the magnitude of the uncertainties, or to the nature of those.
I guess it's a bit of both, but this is more coming from also from past experience, because I used to be a researcher, so I know what uncertainties are, but I also know that when you try to communicate that for the audience, like for a scientist, uncertainty is something that has to be attached to your measurement, because it's a sign of quality. If you're not able to give any uncertainty measurements, you basically, your thing is, you lose credit in a way. Whereas for a layperson, uncertain means we actually don't know, and this like make them lose trust in your result. And it's also like, if you have something with a lot of uncertainty, how do you interpret that? It's more about also making things more actionable, because if you have something very uncertain, you might wonder to what extent, like, is it worth really acting on that or not?
So it's about how to communicate these uncertainties without diminishing how actionable the information is.
Yeah, for me, it's about how to communicate the uncertainty and to make, and still make the information operational, and what to do with that. Interpreting or, really about action.
Thank you.
But most of the end users wouldn't be able to even understand the different sources of uncertainty or the magnitude of the uncertainty. So that is, explaining uncertainty in a way that is understandable is also challenging, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely faced that issue. I've been facing that issue definitely. Like working with the financial sector, for example, they are really interested in knowing what's the worst case scenario. But if you account for all sources of uncertainty, you end up with very wide uncertainty ranges, which is something that in the end they pretend they can't do anything with. So yeah, I definitely have encountered that issue. I'm not sure how to solve it yet, but maybe some others have things to chip in as well.
Yes, Suraj has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm looking at the question here, and I think there's an interesting tension that happens between the local and, say, the European level. So I think, for example, there are sort of very strong desires, I think, that are quite different. So I think at the European level, it's probably very important to have consistency and coherence. So think about here, I think someone mentioned EUCRA, so the European Climate Risk Assessment. So there's an exercise where it would be great if, climate service providers would provide a consistent set of, scenarios, projections that people can then use across the entire continent, right? To have consistency between, transboundary water as an example, but many other things. But I think, so that's something that's kind of desirable, and I think it's on the wish list of many constituencies, European Environment Agency, European Commission, many others, member states, and so on. But I think then there's a, when you think about local and regional levels, I guess many climate services need to be tailored. And again, in the first session, I think we talked about our context is so important. That then changes a lot of the requirements that climate services need, because I don't know, orography is very localizable. The models may not pick up those things. Language, we may need to put this in a different language. So I just thought I'd allude to, I guess, something that I've noted over the years, that there are some strong desires to, I guess, standardize, to have it consistent. But at kind of these global scales, think about IPCC, think about European level. But then I think when you go to a local and regional context, and culture is much more important, and so the desires are very different. So I think there's a real tension there. Sorry, I hope that makes some sense.
No, indeed, and as a matter of fact, that tension between scales and harmonized data and local data, because not only because the harmonization of data available at global or European level, but also the granularity and the details of local and regional data, and articulating how to combine both is one of the challenges that we are facing. To which extent standardization or harmonization could help better combining or better articulating those scales of knowledge, because in the end is knowledge provision at certain scales which could be applicable at local or regional scale. I don't know if the actionable part that we were talking about, so we can have trustable information at European level, harmonized information at European level, which could be or could turn into action differently depending on the local context or the regional context. And could something like that make sense? So the way you apply, the way you use and standardized information, which is harmonized across Europe, is different depending on the context and the challenges and the conditions in which you are activating climate adaptation.
Yes, I think the short answer is yes, because if you think about, we've had in the past European scenarios of climate, right? But then, because, for example, if you think about risk, it depends on, exposure, vulnerability. That the way the information is actually knowledge, as you talked about, is used can be very different, right? So if a system is very underdeveloped, there's not a lot they can be doing with information if they can't act. But a system that's very well advanced may be able to cope much better with that. So I think that that's going to happen. Yes, that then even the same type of information will then get used, in different ways. Yeah.
And anyhow, acknowledging that local regional data is going to be developed anyhow with more granularity and more detailed information, providing more detailed information. And acknowledging also that climate adaptation action is going to be different depending on the context and the local regional realities, but would make sense to advance towards standardized, harmonized data development at local regional level, or we should only aim to have that European level with harmonized benchmarkable information and allow local regional data development without any further harmonization.
I think it depends a bit on the purposes. Sorry, if you're asking me, and please chip in other colleagues. I think, for example, for something like EUCRA, European Climate Risk Assessment, it is quite helpful to have a harmonized data set on vulnerability, adaptive capacity, all sorts of indicators, including then your climate futures and your socioeconomic futures, right? So that would be useful to have. I don't think we have many of these things sometimes, but also for other people. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier TCFD, right? So I mean, the amount of companies, and I guess Climate Analytics does this, right? And other colleagues, but there's a strong interest in looking at assets, right? I mean, because you want to know what's the physical risk to my assets. And so again, I know some colleagues actually in the UK here who are producing, I think these are global maps now. So global maps, and then I guess it's just about the resolution. How far can you go? Is it 2 meters? Is it 1 kilometer? Is it realistic? Is it not realistic? So I think this is kind of happening actually, because the demand is there. So my colleagues are from this thing called the Center for Greening Finance Institutions. And so they're producing data sets to I guess better understand exposure and vulnerability, and then want to introduce hazards. So and some of these things are like 2 meters. I mean, some of the data sets. So now then the issue is I guess, do you want to harmonize it all? Because obviously there's even on the past there's uncertainty, let alone the future, which we talked about already a bit. So then it becomes a little bit on the purpose. But I think, to me, the demand has been created through TCFD, ESG, and many other things. So people now want as high a resolution as possible to figure out, is my asset in danger? Do I need to declare it? Do I need to disclose it? And so on and so forth. So I think it's in train and I've I guess I've given 2 examples. One is the EUCRA one is really European wide. But then when you think about a company that's got assets, then you're talking meters to a kilometer. So I think between those 2 scales, there's a huge array really of things. But my sense is that there's a strong. I think you've used the word harmonize. I think that's a good word. I think there's a strong desire to harmonize, because otherwise the problem. I feel like the problem we now have is we have petabytes of data, and in a sense, there's almost no one out there helping you make sense of petabytes of data. So the harmonization, be it by Copernicus, by any private climate service providers who are here, or by anyone else, is very helpful to decision makers, because I think otherwise there's just a lot of stuff out there and it's difficult to make sense of it, unless you're a deep expert in the area. Yeah, but I'd be interested to hear other views. Yeah.
Actually, I have been hearing a lot about climate information that serves climate services. And if we go back, I mean, which is a fundamental part of climate services, but if we have the questions, why are climate services important for the implementation of adaptation mission? Maybe I want to discuss with the rest of you. My perspective is that it can be very valuable, the climate services, to help the regional and local authorities in their decision making, meaning it's not only about climate information, but also how to support better their decisions. And I think here is the opportunity and probably the challenge. So what do you think about that? And in relation to this is like, we can have the second question about if you have good or bad experiences about using climate services because they were maybe not fit for purpose, or and if they really help in a way in this decision making. I don't know if you have any experience. I think we have just 2 minutes before we go back to the main room. So any thoughts about that?
I think that, as you said, it's very valuable that these services are scaled down to the regional offices to act on local policies. But it still goes back to the mandate, because in order to provide quality information, then the provider has to be sure that the data has got a high level of quality in order to influence decisions. So, and the mandate, as I said before, should be solid through the years. So should be less affected by fluctuations in opinion and establishments. So also because, I mean, climate has got an investment which has quite of a long tail, let's say. And if you want to provide services which are quality, you need to invest on a longer scale than 5 or 10 years time even. But yes, I agree. That would be a positive outcome of a climate service of a good quality. Yeah.
And just to, I guess we have just 1 minute. Within Climate Europe too, we are very interested to find out, we call it once horror stories as a joke, but a bad application of climate services. And we want to have these lessons learned from these experiences that maybe were not that good. I mean, everyone wants to do their best, but maybe for one reason or another, they don't target the needs. And we would be very much happy to understand these experiences and learn from them. Do you have any knowledge of any of these experiences? It does not seem so.
But well, during the session, we mentioned the EUCRA, TCFD has been mentioned, the financial sector, offshore wind have been mentioned here. And I think that all those are examples in which now and already now or currently climate information is being used, and therefore some sort of climate services have been deployed. And I think that the challenges were mentioned around those tensions between scales, resolution or granularity, the benchmarkable information versus the local action and targeted action, taking into account, and I think those were two important hints, the policy mandate and right now public administrations and public services around climate projections are playing an important role in what is happening also in the private sector, and also this uncertainty communication and uncertainty management. I don't know if those are the main elements of the discussion, or you want to raise an additional example as Sayo was asking for.
Yeah, it's to share an example. I think that from what I heard, I don't know if you remember the big flooding in Northwest Europe, including like Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Luxembourg in 2021. From what I've understood in Wallonia, I know that there was a place with a dam, and the dam was quite full, and they knew that they had received warning from climate services saying like, look, there's going to be some heavy downpour in the coming days. But the problem is that they decided to open the gates to because they were afraid of this time overspilling, and they decided to open the gate at the worst possible moment without letting the people downstream know. So that led to a lot of flooding, which could have been avoided, because a couple of days before, knowing that there is a high risk of heavy rainfall, you know that you need to make some space in the dam in order to accommodate for the extra rain coming at once, and then you can regulate the flow. So I think this is an example of things that were awfully wrong. And I think as well another example, but I'm not sure to what extent this is true or not, but I remember hearing that some local authorities had received information. The problem was that the information was, to the practitioners, it was something that made sense, but to the local mayor, this was something that was not interpretable. And so that meant that, and that's what I mean between the gap between the data producer and the data user, is that those were not capable of acting in response to this information.
So the way of making the information available and
and interpretable.
Yeah.
Maybe I can comment on that note, Sophie. I totally agree. Making quality information available and interpretable. And in that sense, I believe climate services has a huge potential in educational aspects in terms of improving societal resilience on a local scale. What are the best responses, emergency response to an event such as flooding or other extremes?
Okay, they should be moving us to the plenary soon, because the session is includes this plenary feedback.
I think we have just 1 minute, so we will then be moved there. I think we touched a little the 3 questions, mainly the first one, maybe a bit less about guidelines and standards to enable the uptake, even if we had some conversation about the standardization and harmonization, which I think goes in line with this last question.
Maybe
yes.
Just a last thing is that maybe what would be worth for the consortium, if you want to delve more into these things that were horribly wrong, is to have a look at some report from like a parliamentary commission when there is something, because I know that in Wallonia there was something like that, and they came up with some recommendation. And